All right. So what we're going to try to go ahead and do today, and get about as far as we can, is we want to review basically everything in the unit from 600 to 1450. Okay, and then we have a little bit of time left over, kind of get going on the beginning parts anyway of the 1450 to 1750 part. So those are kind of the two that we want to look at. Does everybody have all of those review materials? Yeah, you would have gotten before. So 600 to 1450, 1450 to 1750 is the second part. Like I said, we'll probably spend a little bit more time on that first part, but 600 to 1450. What we're going to spend and probably utilize the most, that like we're kind of going to be referencing back and forth to, is going to be two different things. One is going to be this Unit 2 packet, the one that says World Cultures Maturing. Unit 2, and the thing that we're going to kind of be bouncing off the most probably is about a couple pages into the packet, there is a huge world map that somebody long ago decided to basically put down every single note for the entire unit of 600 to 1450 on one page. And there's some pretty good info on there in a pretty small amount of space. And there's that. No, this is done by somebody. And every unit we have here, besides, so this one's 600, 1450, every unit we have, somebody went ahead and did this. They put all the notes on one particular sheet of paper. So there's a couple more of these, and typically these are pretty good ways to go, just because you can have one page and you can kind of get the bulk of what you hopefully need to kind of grasp out of that. So that's where we'll kind of be taking a look at. So kind of just have that one handy, and probably have that map kind of sitting out there handy is probably a good place to start. And then the other thing we'll probably have handy as well, and we probably we'll just kind of see as we bounce through things, as we cover something, as we kind of cross something big. If you guys could have those name 5 charts out, because remember, by the end of our study, we want to have this thing completely filled out. We want to have that as a good reference point. So kind of as we bounce through this stuff, it's not a bad idea to have that probably out as well. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of a good place to start. Anybody remember? I think you came to some of at least one of the review sessions at the end of class, or the beginning or after school review sessions at the end of last week. What we wanted to do when we talked about 600 to 1450, make it as easy as possible. We said we can kind of acronym this thing out a little bit. And what we sort of described 600 to 1450 as was this unit of the 4 M's. Okay? Unit of the 4 M's, plus we're going to add a couple other things kind of on top of that, but that's a good place more or less to sort of start. You guys remember the names of those 4 M's that we had said before? Alright, we're going to say this is the era of the Mongols. What else? Mongols, the Muslims, alright, the Middle Ages, and the Ming Dynasty. Alright? Now, that's not everything. That's a good place to kind of, like I said, that's a good place to start. It's not necessarily everything. Because the other stuff that we're going to want to, I guess, kind of more or less throw in there on the side that we also said doesn't necessarily start with the letter M as well, is kind of think about it as the time of the 4 M's plus the Byzantine Empire. Okay? So we got the Byzantine Empire happening, the Eastern Roman Empire. And then on top of that as well, we've got some other connections throughout the rest of the world too, and it kind of just, one way or the other, we can sort of make a connection between all of these places and another part of the world. But it's really kind of like the 4 M's plus the Byzantine Empire. And if we kind of put all those things in context, we put it together, hopefully it kind of makes a little bit of sense for us. So, where do we want to start? What do we think out of those 4 is maybe the most important place to start with? The most important impact kind of on 600 to 1450. More than maybe anybody else. What's a good? What's something around 600 that's a good place to start with? Probably the Muslims, right? Somebody said that before, didn't they? Why don't we start with the Muslims? Why don't we talk a little about kind of the impact here, and what kind of stuff we maybe sort of have to think about as far as that particular event. All right, what they're going to be expecting to do is know some of the basics, very simply, about the foundation of the religion. All right, so what's kind of unique about the religion, where it comes from, and. Well, why don't we just kind of see if something kind of pops up, and in that case, if it does, maybe we can maybe we can kind of put it someplace. If we had to put something to do with Islam, where would we maybe put that on our name 5 charts? Where would be a good place to start? Out of any one of those regions, any one of those global regions there. Is there a good place to start for that? Alright, so where does Islam start? What region would we say it starts in and formed in? Alright, Middle East. So why don't we turn to the segment on the Middle East? I think that's the top of the second page. Right? So on the top of that second page where it says Southwest Asia or Middle East, why don't we go ahead and give that a try and list some stuff dealing with Islam. So if we're talking about 5 things kind of deal with Islam, all right, starting with the Middle East, why don't we just put down something like this? Obviously, the first thing we want to say is that Islam in and of itself is a religious force. It's born in 622, as we had said. We would want to know something about, obviously, the foundation of Islam. We would want to know, obviously, that Muhammad is the founder. And if we're talking about any kind of like basic characteristics of the faith itself, we should probably know something about the 5 pillars. Do you guys remember what the 5 pillars of Islamic faith are? Like the 5 things that you're supposed to do if you're a Muslim, just in case we get asked something like this. Yeah?
Hajj.
All right, so one of the things you have to do is you have to take a Hajj once in your lifetime, which is that journey to Mecca, right? What else?
Daily prayer facing Mecca.
All right, you have to do daily prayers, right, facing Mecca.
Okay.
Yeah, 5 times a day you got to pray facing Mecca. So you have to do daily prayers. You got to make a pilgrimage once in your life to Mecca. What else you got to do? One of them is kind of like the foundational thing. Like you probably do this every day when you pray. You maybe don't do that every day, but that's another thing you have to do, right? Is you have to give alms to the poor, or almsgiving. Yep, that's the 3rd. What else?
Allah.
What about Allah?
Believe.
Allah is God. You got to believe in Him. You got to proclaim that there's only one God, right? You have to make the proclamation. It's called the proclamation of faith. You got to proclaim that there's only one God. Muhammad is the prophet of Allah, and Allah is the only God. And anything else? All right. And the other thing is the holiest month of Ramadan. You must fast during Ramadan. Okay. Just throw those out there. As I said, we don't need to put all of those, like for instance, on the chart or anything, but just kind of throw that out there when we say the 5 pillars of the faith. All right. Some other stuff in Southwest Asia or the Middle East, like maybe we would want to know about. We've got the beginning of Islam. We've got maybe another thing that would be kind of significant. Very, very soon after Islam starts, it goes through kind of a rocky period of time. All right, something happens to the faith. It happens actually right after Muhammad dies. It splits. So why don't we say something here about the split of Islam? And with the split of Islam, what does it get divided up into? What are our
those the Sunnis and Shia?
All right, very good. We've got one part Sunni. We've got one part Shia. All right, specific things we maybe want to say about Sunni and Shia Muslims? Who's got more of them in the world today? Where maybe would the groups of these people live? That sort of thing? Okay, so let's start with the first one. Who's more, Sunni or Shia?
Sunnis.
All right, Sunni, exactly. Sorry, there's more Sunnis than there are Shias. What would we also say if we got one question on what was the reason for the Sunni-Shia split? What was the reason why in the years right after Muhammad dies that they split them off?
Didn't they believe that in like praying in different ways, like showing their affection to the Allah in different ways?
That kind of does develop. That is something that does develop between the two. The foundational thing was probably something different from the very beginning, but they did divide up kind of separately later. Yeah.
Then like next person who should like kind of rule them, they didn't agree on that.
They couldn't decide on who should be. You guys remember the name of that person was called a caliph? They couldn't decide who the next caliph was going to be, right? If it should be somebody who's descended along the lines of Muhammad or whatever the case might be. And if you remember those first guys, there was this guy named Abu Bakr, and there's another guy named Ali, and they couldn't decide necessarily who should be the next caliph. That's going real specific. But bottom line is, it was that term called succession. Remember that? Succession. Who should succeed Muhammad? Couldn't really agree to that. And then there are all sorts of like cultural and religious differences that kind of like, bounced up there as well. They kind of make that divide obviously what it is. Okay, what else we got here that we can maybe throw up on our list? Why don't we also put down, and I'm not saying you got to know everything about these two, but there are 2 big Islamic empires that kind of come up in the early days of Islam. All right, there's 2 Islamic empires, and they're not very friendly to say. They don't roll off the tongue really well. Is a way to describe it. Madison, do you remember? Yeah, there was one of them called the Abbasid, and the other one was called the Umayyad. Remember these?
No.
The Abbasid and the Umayyad empires. Okay, listen, are you going to be forced to produce a term like that unattached? No, you're probably not. But if you would see those, you'd see Abbasid, Umayyad. Those are just early Islamic empires that are ruled, obviously, by a caliph, and kind of like express the tenets of Islam in its early years. When we say, by the way, a caliph, the early leaders of Islam, a caliph is going to have what type of powers in the early Islamic faith? They're going to have political power, but what else are they going to have? They're going to have religious power as well. They're going to be some of these people that kind of, as we had said, kind of wear these multiple hats, I guess you could say, in terms of their powers. Okay. The last thing, or maybe second to last thing right here, is let's say something about Islam in terms of its spread. What are some characteristics we say on how Islam spreads in its early years? How does it spread? All right. It spreads very, very, absolutely. Why don't we just say like very, very quickly? It spreads in a lot of cases due to conquest, due to military conquest. And we would also say that people that spread Islam do so out of the fact that many people have this, what we kind of described before, the zeal of conversion, right? The people who converted were very, very passionate, very, very willing and very able, basically, to proclaim the faith and very much into, in essence, what they're doing and very, very strongly believing, obviously, the nature of the core of the faith here. Okay. Early Islam. Some other stuff maybe that we want to do is we say conversion is through some of these factors. The other stuff that we're going to say that like the spread is also going to have to deal with, besides being very quickly and based on conquest, is when we put also that Islam is going to spread a whole bunch based on trade. Okay? What do we always say at the beginning of Islam? That the Islamic faith is really, really good with traders and is really solid with the trading movement because what is something new about the foundation of the faith? About Muhammad himself. Remember that, Kelly? Yeah, exactly. Muhammad was a merchant, right? Coming from a merchant tradition. Early Muslims are going to come from this very strong religious merchant tradition here. So that's going to be a factor in terms of how it spreads sort of as well. Okay. Another factor maybe in how it spreads. Do you guys remember the name of the group of people that oftentimes were the biggest missionaries early on in Islam? People that spread it quite a bit. But these people did so in very unconventional ways. They did so because they liked the song, they liked to dance, they liked to spice it up a little bit. Remember these guys? Yeah, these guys were called Sufi mystics. You guys remember these guys? All right, Sufi mystics, people that spread the faith in very unconventional ways, but did so obviously to new parts of the world, did that very, very quickly and did that very well. So in Islam's early days, it starts in the Arabian Peninsula, spreads out through Mesopotamia, spreads out through, and pushes its way obviously towards India, spreads itself throughout North Africa, and does a very, very good job in a short period of time of obviously spreading the faith obviously as it does. Okay? All right, where do we maybe want to go next then? Let's see here. Talking about Islam, and so what we're going to kind of do is take a look at one theme, so Islam from its early days. Let's now take a look at the spread of Islam. All right, let's talk about where it goes and kind of when it goes there. Because one of your big themes from 600 to 1450 is going to be the spread of Islam. It's going to be its birth, and it's going to be its spread. Okay, think about where Islam was in 600. It didn't exist in 600. Doesn't exist until 622. And then think about what Islam looks like in 1450. It's huge. It's everywhere. It's monumental. So, based on our list right here, can we look someplace else? And let's just go to another region here real quick. Let's take a look at another region where Islam spreads to. What's someplace that's around the Islamic world that the Islamic faith kind of spreads into? We want to take what do we want to look at?